Welcome to Module 16, the Expense Authorization Form. So what is an expense authorization form? Well, I'll talk a little bit about the process and what it is. So an EAF is really used to determine financial eligibility from the province, that being Emergency Management BC, to cover the costs so the city can be reimbursed through a claim submission process. So the EAF the process really supports and confirms cost eligibility or reimbursement. So when in doubt, we always end up kind of creating the EAF. So if there's something that's expensive that we're not sure that it would be cost recoverable, we need to ask the question. We can phone the PREOC, that being the Provincial Regional Emergency Operations Center, to confirm, or after that confirmation, send an EAF if they do think it'll be covered. And in that case, we can create that EAF. It is managed by the finance chief, and it is created on the incident dashboard on the expense authorization form tab. And I'll walk you through that process. But overall, generally, we have really kind of about 4 steps. First, we always ask the question, is this resource eligible for financial reimbursements? If we're unsure, create an EAF. We send that EAF to the director for review and approval. Once it's approved by the director, we will send it over to EMBC for review and approval. And then once EMBC reviews and provides their decision on the EAF, then we update the EAF with the EMBC's approval and the associated documentation. So how do you locate or where the EAF is? So if you log on to VanORCA, we end up going to the expense authorization form tab, and then we can end up seeing any existing EAFs in place and the overall status of it by looking at the approval status. And if we need to create one, we click the Create button. Once we click Create, it's going to open up that form, and we're going to start to fill out the information. So we can go into the form, we can identify the date and time it's created, that is automatic. If there's any related resource requests that are tied to this EAF that we want to seek approval on, we can do that, and we can tie it to many different resource requests, so which is a great feature, and that will tally up the costs for us. We input the requester information, so whether it's most of the times it's going to be operations, but we can put in other sections in the requester information, who is requesting that, who the contact email is. So this is in case EMBC needs to follow up with any questions. Usually it's just going to be the finance chief who will be putting their email in, and then the finance chief's contact number. The expenditure is always going to be cover costs, and then we can relate this to a provincial cost category as well, and this is under the financial reimbursement categories. And then the overall amount that is requested. So if this is not related to any resource requests, we can put the amount in. If it is related to a number of EAFs, it should automatically calculate the total costs of that EAF, of that resource request. We put in the description for this as well. So we do want to enter a clear description of the expenditure. We want to be able to describe, the characteristics of it, what assistance it's going to provide, and in which resources will be used to support the priorities. So an example would be like to support vulnerable populations, 24/7 cooling centers, staffing costs. The cost category, labor, OT costs, the deployment location, if we know it, if it's applicable, then we put the location in, and then the overall description of that resource. So we need 6 staff within one site for 3 days, which is $12,000, in labor. We also end up filling in the rationale, and the rationale is, really explaining the response priorities that the EAF is going to satisfy for financial eligibility. And then an example of that would be like to support vulnerable populations 24/7 cooling centers from extreme heat. So this reduces the potential hazard of loss of life, by setting up a cooling center and support staff to manage the facility. So it takes sometimes a little bit of finesse in writing the details, of this, but we do have, some kind of sample text and guidelines for others to kind of follow through. And then once we're finished creating creating that EAF, then we can send it up for approval. So we adjust the EAF's request status, and then we can send it for approval, in which the director will need to review. Now, it is important to follow up with the director so that they are aware that the approval is acquired by them. VanORCA does not necessarily notify them, so it's good to either have that verbal conversation or follow up with a chat or otherwise, with the director for review and approval. So as part of that, we've created the EAF. Now we've sent it up to the director for review and approval. And then what the director can end up doing, they can go into that EAF. For example, it's going to say approval status pending approval director. They can select that EAF. And then what happens is it's going to open up that form. They go to the approval tab. They can select the approval status, whether it's approved or need more information or otherwise, and then enter any comments as necessary. And then it'll create a digital signature for them and then upload it too as well to the overall EAF. Once the director approves it, what happens is that VanORCA will send an email to the finance chief and to the director, and it'll look like something like the following here, in which it'll give you the accompanying EAF in a PDF document, and then giving you some context on some of the next steps. So EOC Finance Chief, please see the attached resource request if there's one applied to it, and expense authorization form. So in this case, this particular example, there's no resource request related to it, but if there were, then those resource requests would also be attached in this email. So send the EAF over to the Southwest Preoc. There's the email address for review and approval, and kind of supporting the documentation. Now, if you didn't need to follow up with the Southwest Preoc, you can also call them as well to make sure that they did receive this and that they are actually in it. Another note is you don't send this particular email across. It is good to develop your own email and send it over to them. So in that case, we can send it to the Preoc. We can attach the EAF and then put that context, that description and overall rationale in the email, and send the accompanying EAF over to the Southwest Preoc for review and approval. So then now we've stepped through that review and approval, we send it over to EMBC, and then once EMBC provides their review, they're going to send a PDF document back to the EOC Finance Chief or to the EOC contact email inside the EAF. So in that case, what we're going to end up doing, we'd have to go back to the EAF. We can open it up. We can go to the Approvals tab, and then we can fill in the information as provided by the province. So whether they have approved it or they have not approved it, who approved it, who in EMBC approved it, the amount that they said not to exceed to, what position they end up they're assuming, and then the date and time they approved it. And all that information is in the accompanying PDF that they provide back to us. And then we also drag or drop the attached PDF provided by EMBC as kind of part of our documentation. And then we end up saving that. So there's a couple of key points just to remember on the expense authorization form. One is really the expense authorization form is used to determine financial eligibility. It is created by the EAF and it is created by the finance chief and managed by the finance chief. It is approved by the EOC director. And then once approved, the EAF and the associated resource request will be emailed to the finance chief and the director. Once the finance chief receives that information, send an email and the associated EAF to the Southwest Preoc for processing and review and approval. And if the Preoc has approved or not approved the EAF, the finance chief will need to update the EAF with the information and attach the EAF and associated documentation from the province. Now I'll also do a demonstration of what all this looks like as well. So if logging on to VanORCA, I'm going to the expense authorization form. And if I needed to create an EAF, I would click the Create Expense Authorization Form. What that's going to do, once I do that, it's going to open up a form. And then I can start to fill in the accompanying information. Now, just for light of time, I'm going to use one that I've already created in a draft format, but we'll end up sending that for review and approval. So I have one here that's created in draft, and I'll just walk you through that process. So I've clicked Create that expense authorization form, and I start to fill out the information. So in this case, I've kind of walked through it. This one doesn't have any related resource requests, but if it did, I could select the resource requests. If there are any resource requests in here that that need to be related to it, I can select that. And then I can seek eligibility against this particular resource. For example, I won't do that for this point in time. And then I can put the information in on the requester. So in this case, this particular EAF, what I want to seek approval on is from an operational standpoint, and it's looking at kind of setting up a cooling center. The requester is from operations, that being, for example, if I was sitting in the ops section, it's going to be me. The finance chief email, who's creating this EAF on behalf, is going to put their email contact information in there, and then their overall kind of phone number for EMBC to follow up with. We're going to fill in the details around the provincial cost category. So there are elements in which we could select around operating costs, evacuation costs. This is for staffing, so staffing is selected. The amount that this request is seeking approval for, so $12,000. The description of that expenditure, providing the details for that, and then the overall rationale of why I need to put this in place to support my overall incident. And then from that standpoint, now I'm comfortable with this EAF, I can send it for approval. So I can request approval, and in that case, go back up to my form, click Save. And then what's going to happen, it's going to go through that process. It will update the status. It'll say pending approval now director. I should follow up with the director saying, director, can you please review and approve my EAF? In most instances, they're probably potentially aware of this already. You've probably had those conversations. So in that case, the director can end up going over. They can go to the EAF tab. They can end up opening up that EAF. They can go to the Approvals tab. They will review it in its entirety to make sure it looks all correct. It does have the ability to update the expenditure and the rationale if different context needs to be applied by the director, as for more of context smoothing of the description of it. So those fields are editable by the director. And then in that case, they can adjust content as necessary, and then they can end up approving it. Or if they need to send it back for more information, they can end up doing that, or they can reject it, or they can just potentially bypass the entire process, which approves it anyway. So in this case, I'm going to select Approved, and then I can put any comments, Approved. And then if needed be, if I have a digital signature, I can upload that. We can also apply a digital signature in the platform, and it'll automatically apply it once approved. I can click Save, and then what's going to happen is that it's going to process that EAF. It's going to put it up into a PDF file, and it's going to email it to the finance chief, to the director, with the associated information. And it'll also update the status to be approved. So that next step in which would take place is that the finance chief would end up reviewing their email. They would end up sending another email over to the Southwest Preoc, and they'd end up attaching that accompanying EAF and sending it across. So I'll just show you an example of what that looks like. So the EAF has come across in this to the email, and then I can end up following up with the pre-auc with the company EAF, and then provide an email saying, can you please review this EAF for cooling centers for 24/7 support for this event, and any kind of context I want to put in inside that. Now, once the province ends up reviewing that information, they're going to send an email back to the finance chief. And the finance chief can take that documentation. They can end up going back to the EAF. They can go to the approvals tab, and then they can put in the information that's provided by the province. So in this case, they have approved it. It was approved by Ken Meeks, $12,000, and then Southwest Pre-Auc Director, and they approved it on October 6, 1348. And then we end up attaching that documentation, so I can end up dragging and dropping the information from the province, and then that is saved as part of the documentation. And then what's going to happen, it will end up saying expenditure approved, but not to exceed. All the information on the form is essentially updated. Amount requested is $12,000. Amount not to exceed is $12,000. It was completed at this time, and it was sent to the pre-auc on October 19th. And that concludes the overall process for the overall expense authorization form. And we also have a little exercise for you to do as well. So log on to VanORCA, select the training incident, and go to the expense authorization tab. Click Create an EAF, and then just complete it, and then send to the director for review and approval, and then save. They should take approximately 5 minutes to complete. And thank you. This concludes Module 16 or Module 16 expense authorization form.